Today we're here to talk about dogs and celebrate dogs. And the order of events is that we're going to start with Dr. Erika Cudworth, who I'll be introducing in just a minute. And Erika is going to speak for about an hour or so. And this is live streamed, so some people are already here online. And then following Erika's talk, those of us who are here in person will have a chance to have some snacks and refreshments together just outside. And then at 2:30, we're going to get to screening the happy stories. So that will come soon. And I have a few people I really want to thank right off the bat. So I want to start with Erika. She hasn't been introduced yet, but she's here. Erika's here from the UK and has been with us now for a week for our team meetings, for doing research together and planning research to come. So I'm very, very grateful to Erika for all of her time. And I also want to thank Julia Linares-Roque, who you'll be meeting later. Julia is a PhD candidate working with me, and at this point, Julia co-directs the Phyto Research Lab. They are a student, but they are really, in practice, my co-director, and have had a massive impact on pretty much everything we've done. So Julia's here behind the scenes, handling the Zoom, also handling a baby, and there's lots of babies in our lab, so, so there's lots of multitasking. And on that note, I want to thank also Julia's partner and all the other partners in our families who have made this week and every week possible as we've been juggling babies and dogs and cats and all sorts of creatures together. Also want to thank Lauren Van Patter and Carla Rice, who are members of our team, Lauren's here in person, Carla is here online, and Hannah Fowley, who we'll be meeting Hannah later as well, those of you who are in person. And the people at the Improv Lab who are here, thank you so much. You've already been an absolute pleasure to work with and have made this possible. So I also need to tell you about I have a couple of little announcements. So Emma, if you don't mind changing to the next slide, we are recruiting for research still in the Phyto Research Lab. So we're going to be talking about some of our research today with the happy stories, and we're still actually recruiting for that project. So we're doing interviews with people who have dogs in their lives and people in their lives and are in care relationships of some sort with dogs and or humans and other species. And we're especially looking for people actually who are in relationship with service dogs. So if that's you or anyone you know, please spread the word. And then Julia is also recruiting for their PhD project on dog-human play. So recruiting people in Ontario, this is actually a little bit different. It's a series of prompts. So recruiting people who live in Canada who are interested in playing with their dogs for research. So you can find more information about both of those things online if that's of interest. All right, I'm on my second page. So I'm on to introducing Erika. When we started the Phyto Lab a few years ago, and I was reading about dog-human relationships and learning as much as I could, we really wanted our lab to be about taking dogs seriously as sentient beings who make their own contributions to family lives. Hello, welcome. And lucky for me, the first people I started to read was Dr. Erika Cudworth. And it was a perfect place to land because Erika is incredible intellectually and has gifted the world with a number of incredible books. So I'm going to read a few of them. These aren't all of them. Environments in Society, 2003. Developing Ecofeminist Theory, 2005. Social Lives of Other Animals, 2011. She co-authored Post-Human International Relations in 2011, and the Emancipatory Project of Posthumanism in 2018. She has a number of co-edited books, most recently Feminist Animal Studies in 2023. And today she's going to be talking a little bit about her newest book called Animal Entanglements, Muddied Living in Dog-Human Worlds. So Erika's work touches on many themes. I will not do it justice with this introduction, but exploitation and violence, social inequality with humans and other beings with whom we share the planet. And Erika's work points towards other ways of being grounded in relationships that honor recognition and care. So Donna Haraway commented on just one of Erika's books in this way, but I think it's true of a number of them. that her books are for earthly beings united in crafting radical multi-species and environmental justice. Yeah. So, there's going to be, we have a mixed audience today of people who are academics and interested and used to working with theory, and people who are practical in their work with dogs, and people who just love dogs. And I'm excited about Erika introducing some theory, because good theory to me really helps us understand the world. It kind of can make things click into place, but it also opens up new ways of understanding things. And when I read Erika's work, and better yet, when I get to talk to her, that's what it does for me. So I want to stop talking and turn it over to Erika. Welcome, Erika.
Thanks so much, Andrea, for that lovely introduction. And it's fantastic to actually meet people I've been talking with online for the last 2 years in person. And it's fantastic to be in the room with some of our research participants who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting until now. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? So, Animal Entanglements, that's the name of the book. I wanted it to be called something else, but you never get your way with publishers most of the time. And there'll be a few illustrations of this particular black greyhound dog by the British cartoonist Rich Skipworth. He started drawing cartoons of dogs when he got a greyhound, because he said they're not like any other dog he'd ever had in his life. And having lived and currently living with a sight hound, I know this to be true. Okay, next slide, please. So, why be interested in dogs as an academic? Well, so many of us are living with dogs. So in the UK, 34% of homes have dogs, and that figure has crept up since I've been noting the figures. And the UK is seen as a kind of dog-friendly country. It's not. Don't be fooled by that particular image. But elsewhere in Europe, there are far more dogs. In Romania, 45%, Poland, 43%. And those countries, interestingly, their animal welfare organisations were incredibly active with the current conflict in Ukraine in actually helping their rescue organisations rehome and dogs and cats. But Argentina has more dogs than anywhere else in the world. So 66% of households having dogs. So this isn't just a kind of northern phenomenon that we're looking at. And certainly many of us have quite intimate relations with our dogs, which I'll be talking about in terms of my research a little bit later. So we really do share the space of our homes. People like David Blue in the States, he says there are different attitudes, however. So yes, all these people may have dogs, but what are their relationships with them? So he says that some people have what he calls a dominionistic attitude towards dogs. So they are, as Gary Varner would put it, mere pets. Sometimes, and we all unfortunately have seen this, they may be excluded from human space. They may be chained up in a yard or caged outside the home. Bluen also says that some people have a humanistic attitude towards dogs. And here, he's talking about how people may humanize their pets or see them as a surrogate for some other kind of relationship, perhaps with a child or with a partner in their life. But others, he said, have a protectionistic attitude. I'm not sure I personally like the word, but what he means there is that people are really trying to do the best they can by the other animals that they share their lives with. Gary Varner talks about companion animals. These may have some restrictions on the use of space. Certainly I found that in my research. No dogs upstairs, no dogs on the couch. We'll come to that a bit later. But for others, dogs are domestic partners. And I think there are many of us perhaps listening or in the room who may concur with that. Next slide, please. So this is the book. I was very pleased when the publishers found a Jack Russell Terrier for the cover. because I'm living with my second Jack Russell Terrier currently. So what I was interested in was things that sociology, and I call myself a sociologist, had kind of missed. So there's an emerging sociology of the home, but nobody talks about the use of space within the home, and particularly how that space is shared with other animals. There's a whole sociology of food and eating, but it's rarely talked about what we eat, or why we eat, or why we eat some animals and we don't eat others. There's a sociology of the family. It's huge. In the UK, it's the biggest area of study. And intimate relations and emotional ties. But animals really rarely feature in those kinds of discussions. There's also a sociology of work and a sociology of care, often in relation to this. And animals are rarely discussed there either. So that was a kind of question underpinning this whole research project, which is ended by this book. Where are the animal companions in the sociology of the family, work, care, home, food? Next one, please. Now, my overarching perspective or model is that human relations with non-human animals are usually those of domination. And I started off by being quite attracted to the work of the geographer, Yi-Fu Tuan, who talks about pets as an exercise in domination. So he says, when we think of pets, we often think of positive relations, but actually the pet is produced through relations of domination and affection. They're not opposites, they're part of the same thing. They operate on a continuum. And he said, if you want to think about the pet par excellence, the key exemplar of the pet is the dog. Why? Because we've manipulated dogs so much. If you look at the variety of breed, you can see that. And also because we try and manipulate them, as this guy in this Gary Larson cartoon is doing here. More recently, Marianne Montemedi-Fraser, in her fantastic book, I think, Dog Politics, she looks at the stories that scientists and behaviourists are telling about dogs and says they're really quite problematic. If you think of the name of the dog, the Latin name, Canis familiaris, is the domesticated dog or the familiar dog. Familiar to who? To humans. So even in the name, there is some idea that there's a bond, that dogs are hardwired to be with us. However, it's estimated in the UK that between 70 and 80% of dogs have behavioural problems. And Montemedi-Fraser says, well, maybe some of those problems in not realising this bond that's supposed to exist between us is because dogs are objecting to the conditions in which they are supposed to be living. So certainly the wonderful Mark Beckhoff, who was an academic, an animal behaviourist, really, and in his work with the ethicist Jessica Pierce, they've done a lot together, and they would say that often we have really unreasonable expectations of pets and unreasonable expectations of what we expect a dog to be. And something I feel I've been arguing with Donna Haraway for most of my academic career. But I always go back to her, and I'm always kind of arrested by some of the things she says. And one of the things she said in 2008 is being a pet is a difficult job for a dog. And that is something that constantly is a problem for me, or I'm constantly thinking about. Next slide, please. So I was thinking about dogs for a long time, certainly in a previous book. This one, why has it got a sheep on the cover? Because actually my main preoccupation was our relationships with farmed animals in that book, but I also had a case study on dogs to say that other relations with animals might be possible. And here we have a theory bit. I'll try and get through this quite quickly. I often say to undergraduate students, never be afraid of theory. It's just some stuff people have made up. Because that's what we're doing when we theorize. It's not some kind of high-level thing. We're just looking around, reading stuff, and making stuff up. So I wanted to have a social or sociological framework for thinking about our relations with animals. And if you wanted a quick definition, what's anthroparchy? Human domination. But it's not just that people dominate animals. They do so in very different ways. So our relationships with different species differ where we are, historically, culturally, geographically. And they differ in terms of different degrees. So I used, these are more things I made up, in relation to domination, that animals might be marginalised, perhaps in human decision-making. They can be exploited, or they may be oppressed in similar ways to the oppression of human beings. And I thought that domination happened in different places, more stuff made up, in terms of violence towards animals, which is systematic, in terms of the political decision-making, in terms of culture, and in terms of relations of production and reproduction. Next one, please. So how does this... I just love the Far Side. I'm afraid there's quite a few Far Side cartoons in here. So how might this apply in terms of our relationships with dogs? Well, we do marginalise dogs in terms of how we treat them in our homes. Not on the couch, not in the bedrooms, or not in my bed, for example. Certainly, they're marginalised in policy making, as any dog walker knows, when there is a new restriction introduced that may well not be helpful for your dog walking experience. But also, perhaps we marginalise them on a daily basis, because many dogs spend a very long time at home, often on their own. So in terms of exploitation, I'm sure many of us are concerned about things like puppy breeding, the industrial reproduction of dogs, who are overbred to the extent to which many of them are killed, basically. And there are very little restrictions on that. If there are restrictions, often puppies are imported from countries where there are no restrictions. But dogs can be exploited for entertainment, whether that's commercially or whether that's in the home. So we all know dogs may be seen as toys or may be treated in ways that children might more appropriately be treated. Now, I know this is a controversial thing to say, and certainly it doesn't apply to people within this room, but there is a debate about animals that are used for particular purposes. A security dog, which may often be left for very long hours on its own and may be chained. Or perhaps therapy animals. There's been a big debate in the UK about the use of dogs specifically providing therapy for stressed undergraduate students, often for many hours in stuffy rooms and not being able to walk away. And the owners seem to feel very good about this, but whether the dogs are feeling good is another question. Finally, oppression. Well, if we're using harsh training regimes, dogs don't get to do what Gary Larson suggests. They don't get to resist that very often. There are often some nasty implications if they do. So we all know stories of neglect and abandonment, and perhaps a lack of socialisation is also oppressive, not allowing dogs to be with conspecifics. Next one, please. But this I do know, as somebody living with a sight hound, that dogs are not just passive objects, they are creatures who engage with us and who do stuff to try and change the conditions that they live in. So sometimes we enable the agency of dogs, playing with them, allowing them to socialise, getting out of the home, but often it's dogs that initiate that. We've had a whole conversation in the last few days about doggy doorbells and whether it's a good idea for your dog to let you know whether it wants to go in the garden or whether it doesn't. So there is a debate, how much agency do we want to give them? And of course that's a exercise of power. So there are different relationships possible depending on how specific people see their relationship with their dog. But certainly, I would say that dogs are remarkable in being able to change our behaviour. Actually, they read us very well. Next one, please. So one of the things that sociologists are obsessed by is research methods, which is very, very boring. I know, I teach this stuff. So when I started doing research, which I thought was about dogs and people's relationships with dogs, I really thought I was animalising method. I thought it was ever so radical. But the more I think about it now, it wasn't radical at all, really, because all the social sciences are kind of really imbued with human centrism or anthropocentrism. And of course, it's very difficult to represent the non-human, because even if we think we're understanding what's going on, are we? So the fact it's hard enough to understand what other humans are thinking. Even when they're speaking to us, we're listening and we can process that. But understanding what another species is thinking and doing can be very difficult. So as Lindsay Hamilton and Nick Taylor say, are we likely to read everything wrongly, like this guy here? I call myself an ethnographer. I like to wander about, observe things, and see what's going on. And I like to do kind of conversational interviews, often in a particular field site. But there is a real question about how far this actually changes our research methods, because primarily, I might be observing humans and dogs, but when it comes to a lot of the data, it's conversations with people and their interpretation of what's going on. Next one, please. So here are my two research assistants for certainly the London phase of the project. Sadly, they are no longer with me. So here they are at the top in one of the field sites, which is marshland. It's part of London's biggest park, the Lee Valley Park. And what I did was, it was wonderful. I actually had time off from work to wander around, walking with people, with my dogs, with their dogs, and to talk to them about what went on in their lives with dogs. So some people call this mobile interviewing. Margareta Kussenbach just calls it a go-along encounter. I rather prefer that. I also watched what was going on when I was out walking with my dogs, and I kept notes about it for a calendar year. And I think I have 40,000 words worth of notes, which I will never use in my lifetime. Somebody else can have a go with that when I'm gone. So there were two field sites. So there's London's Lee Valley Park. And when I started presenting the data, people said that's because Londoners are strange. They're very cosmopolitan. They're very eclectic. You know, if you talk to people in the countryside, they wouldn't say these things. So when I moved with my family to a village in Leicestershire, in the middle of England, I did some more interviewing, and I didn't find anything at all that was different. So whether that was worth it, I'm not sure, but it meant that I could defend myself a bit better. Next one, please. So what I say when I write about this is that I worked in a research pack. And I would say that some members of the research pack are better in research than others. So certainly, Gypsy was a fantastic research assistant. She got on with everybody, human, dog. She did wander off with some of the dogs when we were trying to interview, but generally, she did the task. This strange creature here, Ruby the Lurcher, is not a very effective research assistant. She doesn't like lots of dogs. She sometimes just barks at random people for no apparent reason. So I did find that the dogs are very important, Because if I was asking people that I knew from dog walking, can I interview you, and then sat in a room, perhaps at the university, to interview them, they'd find that very weird. So I wanted to make this as kind of authentic as possible, so I went with them on their usual route wherever they went. But it did mean, because I had the dogs with me, that the research sample had to be people that the dogs liked and dogs that the dogs liked as well. So they did have an influence there. And I do think there are questions to be asked. So you might say, what a lovely thing to do. What a lovely thing for your dogs. But there was one day when 11-year-old Kevin, who had slight arthritis, did 2 interviews, both of which were long, in the same day, almost back to back. And when I got back in the car, I thought, I just wanted the data. I didn't think about him. So there are ethical implications there for sure. Next one, please. This is a map I'm not allowed to use. I asked if I could use it for the book, and the Lee Valley Park Authority said no. They said, because it's got things on there that no longer exist. And they sent me an artist's impression, which is in the book, and it's rubbish, really. This is much better. This is much better. So you can see the river it's to the left, and it was in the kind of top 2/3 where I did most of my research. And if you can see, there are lots of tracks that go in different directions, and you can walk around there really for a good couple of hours. So there were various kind of routes that I took. Next one, please. In sociology, when we teach undergraduate students, we talk about a change. We say communities used to be about a place. So you knew your neighbours, for example, in a particular village or an urban area. But increasingly, we tell students, communities are about interests. So you might join a particular group. I don't know, you might be part of a reading group. And there's this move from communities of place to communities of interest. But dog walkers, I think, form communities that are in a particular place and that are about interest as well. And certainly, I think that dogs enable communities to be generated. So this person at the top, they're feeling very superior, really, aren't they? My sister lives next door. She hasn't got a dog. She's got 2 cats. She drives to work and drives back, and she never walks anywhere. She doesn't know anybody. So I'm telling her what's going on in the village because she doesn't know, and I know because I've got a dog. And that when you walk your dog, people talk to you, whether they've got a dog or whether they haven't. But it's not just about that. It's not just about dogs as social facilitators. So as this younger woman says here, this is from the London sample, you have a dog, the dogs start playing together, then you get into conversation with people, and that's just a very nice thing to be social outside. So often it's the dogs actually doing their thing, having their social interaction that enables the human interaction. Because many people said, if your dog doesn't like another dog, you tend to avoid those people or wave at them from a distance. But dog walking is quite a levelling activity. I don't know many people who dress up in order to do it. So one of the interesting things is you don't really know much about people's backgrounds necessarily, or what occupation they might have or they might have had. And as this person says, and many people said the same thing, you get to know people you wouldn't usually hang around with, people completely outside your circle of friends. So that has a kind of levelling and kind of integrating quality. And people told me all sorts of stories, friends they'd made, people that now pick their kids up from school, people have work opportunities. There was somebody who was a hairdresser who worked for herself. She said, oh, I just do dog walkers now. So she completely changed her client base, people going on picnics, having drinks together, coffees together, all kinds of things. But sometimes more serious things. visiting people in hospital, looking after their dogs when they're in hospital, for example. So care in a crisis, really. Next one, please. So that makes me think just the process of getting out of the house, walking with your dog, raises questions for ideas about community. But dog walking is a bit of a strange community, because for those of you with dogs, if you go at the wrong time, or if you change your route, it's a whole different mix of people and dogs that you might meet. So it really is about that kind of established daily practice, going the same way at the same time, that helps this generation of community. It's also a shifting community because people move, people die. 2 people died actually while I was doing the London study, very sadly. And dogs, of course, have a far shorter lifespan than we humans do. So maybe I should be talking about plural micro-communities rather than being very firm and thinking it's a post-human community that's being produced. But definitely, the dogs have agency in doing that. And a lot of the research that's published suggests it's kind of people that make connections by being out and about. It's almost like the dogs are irrelevant. I don't think they are. Next one, I think. I'm conscious of the time. Now, I wanted to include this illustration. I know it's about a cat, but I live with cats too, and many a time I have been faced with the dead bird issue in my home. How do animals change the home? The title I wanted for the book really was Muddied Living, because I think that's what's going on. And certainly, people are engaging with a lot of stuff that they might not particularly like being brought into the space of the home. And I did read some stuff on the notion of the home, the ideal home in Western societies, and it doesn't really involve dogs or cats. In fact, people are advised to get rid of their dogs for a bit, make them stay with somebody else and have the house deep cleaned before you sell it. So you get rid of the smell of dog, which everybody will be able to sense. But when people were talking about, and we did have kitchens that were wrecked, kitchen cupboard doors that were just eaten, sofas, chairs eaten, cushions were a particular target, I think, for dogs. But there's certainly humour involved in the ways in which our lives are muddied. As this woman says, she cannot stop laughing when she's telling me this. He farts a lot, pretty much constantly when he's dozing. He just creates an atmosphere, a thick fog of horror, and always nearest to me as well. And sometimes, well, bloody hell, phew, God, a thick fog. And she kept having to stop because she was laughing so much. So people were telling dreadful tales of dogs that had eaten things and thrown them up. But on the bed, why on the bed? You know, so why can't they do it on a tiled floor? But it was always told with humour, or even the sofa wreckers, you know, but he's the perfect dog now. This was a dog that ate 3 sofas, couches, but then ended up as the perfect dog. Next one, please. And certainly there were some who restricted the use of space by the dogs. But I'm not sure that necessarily changed their relationship with them. So this guy here, he says clearly he's quite a big dog. The dog was absolutely enormous. It was like a small horse and a very chunky dog, not just a tall dog. So he's not allowed on the sofa because there wouldn't be room for anyone else. And that's not just a thing you say. That was absolutely true in the case of, you know, I was thinking, would the dog actually fit on the sofa? He was that large. So he says he's got the run of the downstairs, but you can see, just looking at an animal, you can see why those restrictions might be in place. Or there were many people, particularly in the sample in the countryside who had more than one dog, multiple dogs. So this person at the bottom usually had 3, sometimes she had 5 or 6. So she said, there's no way that we could have that many and have them going all over the house, because it was clearly something that she would have found quite challenging to cope with. So spatial restriction, I don't think necessarily means a weaker relationship or a less intimate relationship. It might, but I didn't find it in the data. Next one, please. Now, I've called this a dirty pleasure because people are embarrassed about sleeping with their animals. Some people are very defensive. You know, sleeping with your Jack Russell, what's not to like? You know, somebody was really quite angry when they said that. And obviously, when they say this to other people, this is seen as a negative thing. And most of the people I spoke to, if they slept with a dog, they hadn't started out intending to do this. And so there were some of the funniest stories were the ways in which dogs would try and negotiate getting first into the bedroom and then into the bed. And this person, I said to her, you have to say yes to an interview because we're related. Because her dog was Gypsy's brother. They were litter mates. So I've got a king-size bed, and he takes up most of it. So I usually find that I'm across the top or wedged into a really small bit of the bed, and he's stretched out over the whole thing. And he takes up a surprising amount of space for a small dog. They're big dogs, but they're skinny dogs. It really amazes me. He's so heavy, I can't really move him. I have to actually wake him up and get him off the bed just so I can move. So these are quite... These are quite kind of extreme things that we might experience being shoved around by a dog in the middle of the night. Interestingly, in homes where there was a heterosexual partnership, it was more likely to be men that said no dogs on the bed. And some of the women did say, oh, when my partner's away, the dog comes in the bed. That was actually quite a common thing. But certainly it was something that people were embarrassed about or defensive about. I mean, some people might say there's more pleasure to be had from sharing your bed with a dog or a cat than there might be with another human being. But there we go. Next one, please. And there were lots of stories about sharing homes and the impact of sensory difference. So, which is why I called this slide living by the nose, really. So there's lots of food that gets stolen. And the woman who told me this story, she had a rescued Staffordshire Bull Terrier dog that had been dumped in a bag in a canal. So the staffy from out of the canal, he could open the fridge, and he'd do it while you're there. And when I was trying to interview her, it was actually at her home, and she said, stand up, Erika, come here, because she wanted to show me, in front of her fridge, what the dog would do to try and shove her out the way before he would open it. So he'd do it in front of people. And she was crying at the end of the story because she was upset. And she said, of all the dogs I've had, he was absolutely the best one, after tales of robbery, really. And lots of people would say, but I put things at the back. I put things out of the way, like this. 12 onion barges and 12 samosas, frozen. It was the frozen that made me laugh. From on top of the cooker, big clang. But on the back of the cooker as well, by the time I got in there, nothing left. Next one, please. So it has made me think, and this is a kind of ongoing preoccupation for me, that we are primates, we're noisy. We talk, we shout. See, I can only wave one arm around because I've got the microphone in the other hand. Normally I'd be waving two, and dogs just don't do that. They have a completely different way of communicating. And people did recognize this. So I don't appreciate they could smell thousands and thousands better. So what I think is a way, because I can't see it and the dog can't see it, it's not a way for them because they can smell something. And this person, we shout at them, we wave our arms around like when they run off, and we sit and stare at them and freak them out. So a lot of how we behave may not be very good in terms of our relationships with dogs. We put food away, and he can smell bloody anything. A door doesn't stop him smelling, and this is great. And he's so clever, he can open doors. He's more clever than my husband, he can close them too. So there are conflicts and there are tensions, and yes, people are kind of laughing through them, but this kind of compromise and difficulty is very much there in our kind of interspecies dog-human relations. Next one, please. Now, one of the tricky chapters of the book is about food and eating. I didn't set out to ask people what they ate or what their dogs ate, but they nearly all told me. And some of them had quite a lot to say about it. So in my sample, I would say that people had a lot of animal capital. What people in animal studies tend to mean by that is that people try and do a bit of research on dogs, try and understand what is a good diet for my dog. They try and do their best in terms of feeding and caring. And all the people that I spoke to claimed to love animals. That was really common. People would say, I love dogs. Usually, I love dogs. I love them, love them, love them. That was very common. But they loved other animals too. People expressed concern about the pet trade. They expressed concern about puppy feeding or the treatment of some pets, particularly rabbits actually came out quite a lot in the data, the caging of animals. In the sample, there were 7 people I knew to be vegetarians just because they told me they were, and there was one person who was a vegan. And the others, I kind of divided them up. I said some of them were carnists, they ate meat, and they didn't think about it. So there were people that say, every week we cook a whole chicken, we hand strip it, the dogs have that with some veg. You know, that's good for them. That's better than food out of a can. And I had other people saying that they were vegetarian, they did cook meat for their dogs, but they couldn't touch it. Or that it made them feel quite unwell. So some people did differentiate in terms of what they ate and in terms of what their dogs ate. But most people seem to accept what Melanie Joy calls carnism, this idea that it's natural, normal for dogs to eat meat, that it's essential for their health. And there was a whole thing that was about, if I'm a vegetarian, that's my choice. I can't make that choice for my dog. And I think part of that was about the ambivalence, really, of having a dog as a pet. People were quite kind of critical about that. I did think everybody was trying to do their best and thinking about the health of their dog, however. But I've got a few quotes. On the next slide, please. So these are 2 vegetarians and a vegan here, and you can see that kind of, it's a natural diet coming through. I kind of accept it. He's a dog, he's not a vegetarian. I think the whole raw meat and bone stuff is really good for him. His health's more important. And this is the choice one. Vegetarianism is to do with humans having a choice, not being under any necessity of eating meat. Dogs are essentially wolves, and it's an essential part of their diet. And in some of the literature it says, well, vegetarians might be a bit flaky, but the vegan, surely a vegan wouldn't feed their dog meat. And this is somebody who had really experimented with a vegan diet for her dog. I don't know. They don't have the same enzymes. It's like trying to give a horse some meat or a sheep a nice bit of steak. Some things are meant to be. And she actually turned to the dog after she said that and she said, you like your meat, don't you? It was really, really bizarre. This is probably an illegal image, actually, because I wasn't allowed to use this for the book because of the copyright on it. But I thought, PowerPoint slide? Never mind. I actually found a quote from the graphic designer that told me everything that I needed to know, because he said, Canagan insisted that the dog on the logo looked like a wolf because they were trying to say this was a natural diet. It was like dogs' ancestors, the wolves, would have consumed. And that's something that is coming through a lot. I thought 25 years ago there'd be a lot more vegetarian diets for dogs, but there aren't. There is some change, but not that much. But there is this real natural, it's natural for dogs to eat meat. That's really coming through very strongly. Next slide, please. But certainly eating meat, feeding dogs meat, even for people who ate meat, was slightly problematic. And people did kind of go round in circles sometimes in their discussion. Pork is, well, it's one of my favourite meats. It's probably the one that troubles me the most because they're supposed to be as intelligent as dogs and have similar emotions, which is quite chilling, really. There were quite a few people that made that kind of comment. This wonderful picture is by the German vegan artist Hartmut Kuert. And in one series of paintings, he puts farmed animals, and sometimes farmed animals and pet animals, in domestic settings, which is quite thought-provoking. Next one, please. Now, I think most people living with a dog would say that dogs involve a bit of work. Certainly, as this man says here, very different to having a cat. And I think that's the walking element, and I think that's the concern about dogs not being able to go out and about by themselves in the way that many cats can. So people were juggling. Somebody said it's like a walk, work, walk sandwich. That's what my days are like during the week. And people walked a lot. So people were walking at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes longer than that. So that is a significant care commitment. And there was also a gendered impact to that. So certainly, it's, in both the London and the Leicestershire sample, there were women who would walk together, particularly in the winter, and they were going early morning before work, and it would be dark. And certainly what everybody didn't want to see in the dark was a man without a dog. That became a new kind of category. Lots of people said that. And even one of the guys in the sample, he said that the walking with the dog had given him freedom. He said, I'm a builder, I'm up early. Imagine if I like going for a walk. Imagine if I was just wandering around here in the dark. What would people think? So having the dog was actually quite liberating for him because he felt, if people see me with a dog, then they'll know that I'm there for the purpose of walking a dog and not for something else. Certainly, there's all kinds of care services that we might provide, organising the trip to the vets. But of course, now you have doggy daycare, dog walkers that might come in. And that made me think, particularly the burden of care for ageing animals, for animals when they're sick, or animals when they're very young, lack of sleep, disturbed sleep. I thought, well, this is very similar to lots of the tasks that are involved looking after older humans, ill humans, or very, very young humans too. Next one, please. But is it all one-way traffic? Is it all what we do for dogs, or do they give us stuff back? And I do think being there, it sounds a bit weird as a form of care work, but so many people said, oh, you never come home to an empty house, the dog is always there to greet you. And I think it's, but the dog's been there, possibly very bored. It made me think about the material about women who weren't working, looking after young children, and staying at home all day, and also bored, perhaps, and also feeling a sense of confinement. So yes, they certainly don't get to take the car into town. And also, people did talk about emotional support. I don't think there was anybody that didn't say something that would fall into that category. And this kind of sums up, this quote from this woman, a lot of what people said. They're quite intelligent. They respond to how you feel. They feel your emotions. If you're a bit upset, they feel that. They want to be tactile. They want to touch you. They want to be close to you. So everybody had some story of care. Next one, please. So I thought, maybe you ought to rethink. I identify as a feminist. I've read all the stuff that feminists have written about care and housework and domestic labour and is it exploitative and boring and all this? But actually, should we start rethinking care work as a reciprocal activity and also including animal companions in thinking about this? I was thinking about the tasks. If it's caring labour for humans, you might clean up homes, bodies, you might shop, tidy, you might train with a child. You're certainly socialising a child. You're preparing meals, you're feeding, you're entertaining. And isn't that the same as the labour that people do if they are a good dog owner or want to be seen as a good dog owner? They will play with their dog. They will socialise their dog. And I think it's not just we exercise dogs. I actually think dogs exercise us. And many made the comment that they loved going for a walk. They wouldn't do it if they didn't have a dog, or they wouldn't get out of the house so often if they didn't have a dog, and that enabled their kind of socialisation and exercise. And of course, you're feeding, and you might be managing doggy daycare, just as people manage childcare. And so, yes, I think dogs do provide care work. They do provide us with company and support and affection, and they do entertain us. Often it's not just, we're seeking to play with them, they're seeking to play with us. Whether they undertake a nursing role, I think they do, or I think some animals do, that they want to be with you or a member of the household if they feel that you're a bit under the weather. Next one, please. Finally, it made me think about the idea of the family and the role that dogs play. So, as I said, in sociology, family studies, absolutely massive. But in some of the literature, particularly literature coming out of the US, people would refer to themselves as dog moms or dogs as being children. And I didn't find that. I don't know whether it was because of the people I spoke to or what really, but I didn't find any of that kind of dogs as surrogate for other relations. And in fact, there was a kind of anti that, an alter familialism, as I've called it here. So as this young woman says, when you're my age, lots of your friends have had children, your family are thinking you should be having children, then I think it's nice for them to put you in that box and say, oh, she hasn't had children yet, but that Rocky is her little baby, that he's, And so she goes on to say, it's almost for them to reinforce their family values or something. Because everybody thought they were having a relationship with individual animals, even if people had had... I had a couple, when I started interviewing them, the guy said, we've had dogs for 47 years. And there were all these photo albums lined up. I thought, I might be here for a good while. But they could still, even from 47 years ago, tell me the story of their first dog, what kind of personality he had, where they got him from. And we had to go through all of them. These were individuals with whom this couple had been in close relation. And sometimes the way people would describe their relationship with a dog, if you didn't know it was a dog, you could think it's that intimate, it's like a human lover. So as this woman says here, if you're thinking this is about her dog, and she's welling up when she's saying this, It's really hard to put into words. I just have so many feelings when I'm thinking about something, thinking about him during the day when he's not here, something that's made you smile. You know, he just makes you laugh. It's all quite overwhelming. And her dog was 3 years old, and she kept talking about the potential death of her dog. And it was almost like mourning in advance. So that might be quite an extreme case, but lots of people did have that level of intimacy that they wanted to talk about, really. Next one, please. So this is somebody I've been very influenced by in my work. I feel I've been arguing with her for most of the time. But as Andrea said, she did endorse a book of mine, Donna Haraway. This is her dog, Ms. Cayenne Pepper, sadly no longer here. She has another now that she's also writing about. And she described Miss Cayenne Pepper in a lecture as a dog I fell in love with and who changed my life. Because this was what started her writing about people and dogs and animal companions, really. So people wanted to make clear that they were in relation with something or somebody that was not a human. So as this woman says, she didn't like the phrase that a dog is a baby or whatever. It's not. You've got this relationship with something that's not human. It's that thing with a different being. And people would sometimes talk about the weirdness of this, the strangeness of this, and that they would see it as something, as having a magical quality. This man calls it magical. There's something magical about becoming intimate with a member of a different species. The bond of need, dependency, responsibility, and love. Crossing that boundary is very exciting. In some ways, even more exciting than with another human, because it's so much more mysterious. And then he turns to his dog and says, "Isn't it, darling? It's mysterious." It's mysterious. But this woman was getting in a right tiz, and this is only there's paragraphs and paragraphs in in the transcript of her, like, what is it? What is this thing called species? It's so hard to get your head around that she's a dog and that I'm a human. She's so human in so many ways. I just look at her with real love, and I think, God, you know me, and I know you, and you're another, and then we're lots of pauses, and what's going on? You're that thing. You're another species. And I think in relations with dogs, we often have that, where we're kind of struggling with the species barrier. What are they thinking? What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? What does this mean for them? And trying to make sense of it. Next one, please. So here's another representation of Donna Haraway. She's all over the internet. You can find her represented in various kinds of artistic ways. So the British sociologist Nikki Charles says perhaps it's that daily practice, the everyday practice of kinship that we have in households with animal companions, particularly dogs, that enables us to think of dogs as our kin. They might not be surrogates for family members, but they're definitely part of something. They're part of our kinship group. And in some of the research that's come out of Australia and New Zealand, this is an example from New Zealand, the idea that dogs are described as something else by Indigenous participants. And sometimes these terms are translated as family, but often the meaning of the word is more complex than that. So it's not quite family in terms of the Western understanding of what the family is, and is a bit similar to kin, which I think is a bit more of an elastic concept than family. So I do like the term dogkin, or oddkin, as Donna Haraway would have it, because there is something odd going on in our relationship with other species that we're trying to get our heads around. But when Donna Haraway writes, she says, we can be kin with all things. Critters of all kinds, compost even. But can we? So that was my kind of, can we really be kin to all these kinds of things? Are some things, creatures, too odd to be kin? Next one, please. So this is a couple. They're not an intimate couple. They're a couple of friends who meet and walk together. And he's talking about Indian stick insects that are kept by his son in a tank. That's quite common for kids to do in the UK. So he says stick insects are a bit beyond me, because they don't really do very much, and they do look like sticks. But maybe people feel like that about the way he feels about his dog, about their goldfish, but it's more extreme with mammals. It's more evident, it's more clear, he says. And so his friend says, it's the closeness to the living thing, but it's not the relationship side. And I think that was a really interesting comment to make. So with fish, is it the way they breathe, the way they look, their kind of radical difference to us? And this woman at the bottom had fish in a tank. I interviewed her at home, and I asked about the fish. And she said that they're part of the furniture. Actually, it's very similar to the way Ifu Tuan, the geographer, describes fish. She says they're like ornaments. They're not like creatures that we have a relationship. And she says it's because with the fish you can't be in their world. And then she completely contradicted herself, because she took me into the garden, and half of the garden was this enormous pond with koi carp they'd inherited when her father-in-law passed, and they'd had to dig up most of the garden. And she said, in the summer, I sit out here, and she said, they're so friendly. They come up, they like to be touched. You can feed them by hand. And it was only when I kind of looked at the data after I'd spoken to her, I thought, gosh, it was almost like, because she was in their world with her feet in the water, but she didn't have that same relationship with the animals that were in the home. So it really problematized. I was thinking, outside animals, perhaps a less close relationship, although if any of you have got horses, I'm sure you'll be saying absolutely not. So even with fish, there is a possibility. Next one, we're nearly there. So in summing up Muddied living, really, yes, there is the disturbance, the work, the differences that animals, such as dogs, make to the life of the household. But there's also stranger stuff going on. So is it that we don't smell things in the same way? I agree with Rich Skipworth that a sighthound smells lovely. It does have a particular perfume or furfume, as he says here. Is it that they're changing us by muddying our living? Next one. Bit of philosophy, but it's not too much. French thinker Michel Foucault, very short essay that people have made a lot of, and he didn't really say very much in it, of other spaces. But he had this idea of a heterotopic space, which is summed up in this quote by Mead at the bottom. So utopia is a place where everything is good. Dystopia is a place where everything is bad. Heterotopia is where things are different. And I think that does kind of sum up our muddied lives with other animals, with dogs in the home. So dogs are agential. They're getting into beds. They're nicking frozen samosas off the back of the cooker. They're getting up to all sorts, but they're also changing our behaviour and our relationships. So I do have this model of, humans dominate animals, but within the spaces of home, there's loads of possibility for all kinds of other things to be going on. And a while ago, I and Tracy Jensen used the term the mongrel domestic to describe what is going on in multi-species homes, because things aren't quite the same. Next one. So, in conclusion, nice one from Hart McCurrett, who would say all our relationships with other animals need to be questioned and need to be changed. I think there's some of that going on in relationships with companion dogs, but certainly at the end of the project, I felt quite a lot of optimism about possibility in terms of our relationships. And and that there's a lot of joy to be had in those relationships, which links to research that's going on here at the University of Guelph, and certainly from interviewing people and laughing with them, sometimes crying with them, from transcribing those interviews. And my partner did say at the time that he could hear laughter on the recording, and then I was laughing at the recording. So, you know, how that was going in a kind of scientific academic sense, they weren't quite sure. But certainly, going back to that, drawing it together and writing that book gave me a lot of joy.